Hey guys, welcome to 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And here's what I need you to do. Make sure you subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel to stay up to date to everything we're doing here on 3 and Out and the Volume. John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast. One big thing that's been a talking point for the last, I would say, several weeks is who was going to show up and who was not going to show up for mandatory minicamp. Because really, as a veteran player, you do not need to attend anything beside basically 4 days of mandatory camp. One of them's a physical, and the other 3 days are practice. It's the only time you need to show up where the team can take action. And by action in football, it's fining you. And it's like $16,000, $32,000, like $48,000. It adds up to a little over $95,000. Now, I had read a while back that during the new CBA, the fining system changed. That in training camp, remember, if I held out, a lot of players historically held out for training camp to get new contracts, and then they get paid and all the fines are rescinded. That is no longer possible. And I thought that also came into account for these minicamps. So my overall take was, I think it's pretty stupid to just give away $95,000. Like, I don't care what business you're in this economic climate. I don't know if you've seen the stock market. I don't care if you make $1 million, $800,000, $10 million. I would not be handing over net $95K when it's very avoidable. And really, in modern day football, you can just show up and you don't have to do anything. It's not, you don't have to go practice. I saw Debo. He just showed up and stood there. Now, he was interacting with the guys and with the offense, but he did not practice at all. And he did not get fined one penny. Because it makes no sense to give away $95,000. Now, reading Albert Breer's MMQB, I guess mandatory minicamp, unlike training camp, they can take it back. They can rescind it. So if I really like you, let's say the football team with Terry McLaurin, Seattle with DK Metcalf, I could just, not actually fine you, right? But overall, if I needed a new contract, and I was one of these guys, and these guys have deserved new contracts, all the guys we're talking about, Terry McLaurin, DK, Micah Fitzpatrick. I don't think Kyler does yet, given how much money he wants. And he's only going into his 4th year. He's got a 5-year contract. Those guys are 2nd and 3rd round picks, so their contract is shorter. And they don't have 5th-year options. So I'm not budging on my take on not paying Kyler Murray. And giving him credit would be strong, but he made the right decision. I would recommend to anyone, if I was their agent, if I was their friend, if I was their teammate, I think the best business practice is to show up and be around the team that you want to pay you. Because you don't want to go to summer. What do they always tell you? I'm not a married man, but you don't want to go to bed angry at each other. Right now, is that totally realistic all the time? Of course not. But I think anytime, and I think this works in business, it works in personal relationships, anytime you can end a conversation or a situation, even if it's not quote-unquote a positive note, but like you're somewhat on the same page and it's trending toward positivity, it's better than having a negative feeling in the air. So any of these players that showed up, even if they didn't do anything, that's the right business move in my opinion. Because when you stay away, it creates a bigger story and it actually doesn't accomplish anything. Because ultimately, this is not training camp and there's not quote-unquote a date because there's not a game looming. Now, training camp's a little bit different, but now with the fining system, it's just terrible business, Like we've seen, I've said forever, Le'Veon Bell's decision is one of the worst in the history of professional sports. Sitting out the entire season when they were paying him over $14 million, and then he ended up getting a bad contract the following year, and his career was basically over. He literally cost himself $14 million. And more likely than not, given how good he was playing, he would have made more money on the following contract than he did from the Jets, which his career went there to die. So when you're thinking about these situations, and listen, as an NFL player, unlike baseball and basketball, where the money's guaranteed, and if you're just semi-good, you get enormous amounts of money, football is difficult. And your career can end in one snap, one tackle, one bad cut. So you have to be very, very cognizant, and you got to approach it, like you got to take the emotion out of it. I totally get that. But Lamar Jackson, the correct decision. Now, I don't know, by the time you're listening to this, he might be running the practice. I would recommend we're not taking a snap. So I am pro showing up, but I would not be okay with participating. Like, there's a fine balance with a guy like Lamar, a guy like Debo. I saw Jordan Poyer wants a new contract. Some of these situations are different. Some of these guys are on their third contract. Any guy that's on a second contract, like that, it's going to be his first quote-unquote big contract. I mean, Debo Samuel was a second-round pick, right? Lamar Jackson was the 32nd overall pick. Guys that like want new contracts, like when Khalil Mack wanted a new contract years ago, he was the 5th overall pick and had made millions. So these situations are not all apples to apples. And I do think that you accomplish a lot more by just being around your head coach. Because the more you're around your head coach, when you're a good guy, they're going to be more inclined to like force their front office, like, let's just get this done. What are we doing? Why are we pinching pennies? Give them that extra $1 million. And then you move on. And I do think, and I've been saying over and over, Lamar is tough. Because, you know, do I love paying him $45 million a year? No, not ideally. I view him like a better version of Dak. I don't count, why are you counting other people's money? Well, it's a salary cap league. I don't actually care how much money Dak Prescott makes. But when you pay Dak Prescott $40 million and the salary cap is $200 million, it puts constraints on your team. So I said over and over, Dak Prescott, high-level guy, solid player. Would have loved to pay him like $28 million. Because the difference of $12 million to pay other people, which he is clearly very dependent on. I watched him in a playoff game. He couldn't carry his team as a major favorite at home. That happened. I mean, it hasn't gone as well since they haven't been able to consistently run the football. Now, I would take Lamar Jackson over Dak Prescott every day of the week and twice on Sundays, but I don't love compensating him at the Mahomes, Josh Allen level. But the problem is, like, if I'm Lamar Jackson, under no circumstances am I not making minimum 15% of what Dak Prescott made. And we know that Dak Prescott got $160 million, makes $40 million a year. So if I'm Lamar Jackson, like, at minimum, you're paying me $43. I've won an MVP. I saved your franchise. I'd look at John Harbaugh. I remember when I showed up, they were going to fire your ass. And since I've been here, you've gotten contract extensions. And we've gone to the playoffs. So pay me. But I see it from both sides, and these situations are not, they're complicated. Another thing that I saw kind of went viral over the weekend, maybe this happened last week. I didn't know this. I haven't listened to it. But Tyreek Hill is a podcast. And I don't know, maybe people listen to it, maybe they don't. But I saw things that he said on the podcast. I don't listen to a lot of the players' podcasts, but I do enjoy when they like say something specific and it goes viral, because then I can have an opinion on it. And the great part about aggregators and RotoWorld and Twitter is you can find that information without actually consuming their content. Because I probably wouldn't last too long on Tyreek Hill's podcast. Maybe it's good. I don't know. I never took Tyreek Hill to be some big podcaster, but I appreciate him entering the space. He basically said that complained about his usage rate with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think sometimes it's human nature, right? When life goes so well, so well, in Tyreek Hill's last 4 years with the Kansas City Chiefs, he became a Hall of Famer. Like, Tyreek Hill is going to Canton, Ohio. He was the second best player beside Mahomes on a team that went to 4 AFC Championship games, multiple Super Bowls. And he caught, essentially, the game-winning catch to beat the 49ers when they won the Super Bowl on the Wasp play. Right, when Mahomes, 4th and 15 or whatever, 3rd and 15, I don't even remember at this point in time, but hit him on the play that led to them their big comeback. Tyreek Hill. And he basically said that, like, I didn't get used enough. And before I even looked at the numbers and targets, I just thought, this seems like the guy who's in a pretty damn good relationship. His wife loves him. She's a smoke show. Kids are healthy. Job's great. And he's always complaining. It's like, bro, you got it pretty good. Like, your life ain't that bad. And listen, sometimes people, their lives are going so well, they just get negative for whatever reason. Maybe it's just it's just a natural reaction for them. But I think sometimes it's like, no, this is just too perfect. It can't actually be this good. No, bro, it was actually that perfect. You played with one of the greatest young players in the history of sports. Patrick Mahomes, first several years in the league, is borderline unprecedented in any sport how dominant and great the guy was. And when you factor in he's a great deep ball thrower with a huge arm and willing to take chances, Brett Favre style, perfect for, one of the fastest players in league history. And they had an incredible, fruitful relationship. Yet for this guy to complain about it, and he also played with a coach. Like, listen, I see Kyle Shanahan, who I consider one of the best coaches in the league and definitely one of him and McVay, best young coaches. Kyle Shanahan's first reaction to a play is to run the ball, not throw the ball. Where Andy Reid, his first reaction to a play is to throw the ball. And really, Kenny Stabler had this, I actually never heard him say this, but Tom Hanks, I heard interviewed one time and says that he signs his emails. Tom Hanks from the Bay Area was a big Kenny Stabler, Oakland Raider in the 70s fan. And he signs his emails with "throw deep, baby." That was what Kenny Stabler used to say. "Throw deep, baby." And that's Andy Reid. Wants to throw deep, baby. And he did with Tyreek Hill. Who, then I look, because he said, well, I didn't, when you have one-on-one coverage and you're in certain matchups, you got to throw a star a ball. And even Tyreek was like, I'm not trying to be a diva, even though his comments were kind of diva-like. And then so I looked. I said, well, I wonder if Tyreek's targets last year were way lower than previous years or even just relative to the league in 2021. No, he was 7th in targets in the league. And really, he was 10 targets away from being, he had 159, Devontae Adams had 169, who was second in the NFL behind Cooper Kupp. So Tyreek Hill was 10 targets away over the entire course of the season from being number 2 in targets in the National Football League. And if you think about it, Devontae Adams, who was number 2, does not play with Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce, who then I looked, I said, where's Travis? Was 13th in the NFL in targets. So it's like, well, Tyreek, you and Travis Kelce combined, beside Mark Andrews and I think Hollywood Brown last year, by far were the highest teammate combination. So you were not on an island of the sense of you have an elite teammate who is also, while he's a tight end, he's a pass catcher. So they are not going to throw you the ball no matter what every single time. Think about some of their great wins last year. That Thursday night game against the Chargers, the comeback against the Bills in the playoff game. Both guys play a huge role. And I've said over and over and over that I think that combination, Mahomes, Kelce, and Tyreek Hill, while quote-unquote semi-short-lived, it's only going to be 4 years now that Tyreek's not there, is the greatest 4-year combination I've ever seen in my life. Sometimes you just get Rodgers and Devontae. Sometimes, and really Cooper Kupp, now Robert Woods got hurt. Obviously, Kupp got a ton of targets throughout the whole season, but, Robert Woods ain't Travis Kelce. So it's like Cooper Kupp got the majority of the targets because he was far and away he's the only potential Hall of Famer on that skill group. Travis Kelce's going to the Hall of Fame with Tyreek Hill. So when you have multiple Hall of Famers, you give them both the ball. It's Michael Irvin wasn't bitching him on like, if we didn't give it to Emmett as much. And listen, I get it. He's in this new shiny place. And I think he also said something about accuracy with Tua. It's like, bro, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here on Tua, but I would not go out on a limb and start, pounding my chest pro Tua, anti Patrick Mahomes. That's just not going to age well. You're going to lose that battle over time. It's like what I say with Seattle and pounding the table for Drew Lock. Like, I get it, John. You like Drew Lock coming out of college. And now you guys are excited to have him on your team. But you just traded Russell Wilson, who, if he's healthy with the Denver Broncos, is going to continue to be good. And more than likely, Drew Lock and you are going to suck. So you can say whatever you want. And historically, you could always say things. Now we see it. The evidence is there. We watch every game. We all got the NFL package. We got ESPN.com. We don't miss much anymore. So, you can't tell me Drew Lock is good when we've watched him and we know he sucks. You can't tell me that you're better off now without Russell Wilson. That's not a fact. Even though I understand maybe it was time for a divorce. I get it. But you are ultimately going to lose to public opinion because Russell's going to be good and Drew Lock is going to not be good, right? So Tyreek Hill is kind of feeling himself. He just got paid a lot of money. He's earned it. He's been a dominant player. He's been one of the most honestly one of the most unique players I've ever seen. Right? I always thought Deshaun Jackson was going to be the best deep threat of this modern era, not named Randy Moss. Tyreek Hill is on a completely different level than Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson was a great player. And Tyreek Hill is the Hall of Fame version of that. So I just think that if I was recommending, like I'd pump the brakes on some of the Chiefs slander. I was reading Breer this morning, just like, I need to find a little NFL content. What is really going on? And he talked to Matt Ryan for a long time. He talked to Matt Ryan. He talked to Frank Reich. And one thing Matt Ryan mentioned is that he hasn't watched this much film in the offseason his entire career, since he first got to the league and he was just trying to learn what was going on. And it makes sense, right? Once, because you're just with the same team, you know your teammates' strengths and weaknesses, you get to practice with them. When you go to a new place, and this is what Matt was saying, like, I had to do a lot of film study on individual players. Like, I had to see what Michael Pittman Jr. did. I had to see what Jonathan Taylor did. I basically just watched them like a scout, watched our offensive linemen. I basically put a scouting report in my head separate from watching Frank's scheme of our individual players, so I could get to know them fast before I even started practicing with them. And I was just thinking that last year, Matt Stafford's career, who ironically Matt Ryan leaned on when the situation happened, because it happened to him last year, and he reached out to Stafford. He said, "What's it like?" And he asked him, his thoughts on once he realized that he might get traded. And basically, Stafford told him, like, "This would be the best thing that's ever going to happen to you." Because like anything in life, when you, even if you're the most ambitious, hardworking human being, it is human nature, I think, to just get semi-content or get you get consistent in something, and I think sometimes you can take your foot off the gas pedal. And anytime you're forced into change or change is forced into you, if you're worth your salt, it'll wake you the fuck up. And Matt Ryan, he's been playing in an organization for the last several years, which has basically been irrelevant. I remember when they played the 49ers last year and they were 7-7, I was like, this is the worst 7-7 team I've ever seen. And their games just did not matter. And I think a lot of people, I guess Matt Ryan ain't even any good. Is he just a stat patter? I mean, hell, people called Matt Stafford Pad Stafford. And you know what it turns out Matt Stafford was? A very talented player with a ton of ability who was stuck in Detroit. If he had been with a Sean Payton and Andy Reid, a Bill Belichick his whole career, we would talk about him consistently differently. Now, Matt Ryan has benefited, unlike Stafford, he's had some good coaches. He's played on some really good teams. He's been to an NFC Championship game. He went to a Super Bowl. He was obviously leading that Super Bowl. So he's won an MVP. He's had some moments. But his career, I would say, became somewhat stuck in neutral. Now, he's older. He's not 30 years old. He's not even 33 years old. He's 36 years old. But I do think that this has the opportunity to change the way that we look at Matt Ryan. Because once upon a time, Matt Ryan was viewed as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. We haven't thought that for years now. And he gets to go to a team with an offensive-minded head coach, a team that was desperate to get consistency at quarterback. They have had how many quarterbacks? Basically a quarterback a year for the last several years. And the last quarterback they had, for whatever reason, just can't seem to get along with people. Like, I'm sorry, you could argue maybe it wasn't all Carson Wentz's fault with the Eagles. Now, a year later, it's hard to say, yeah, it's probably more Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz has problems fitting in, and he consistently finds himself fitting out. And then I see him interviewed, and he's taking the high road. And listen, he always says the right things, but clearly his actions don't match that when he's in the building. And now you got Matt Ryan that no one could argue is like one of the most consistent humans in the league. I think is just going to give them stability. He's going to be motivated. And Stafford has more talent than Matt Ryan. But I do think, like similar situations, you go to a more talented team, you get this fire of like, I finally get to prove like I'm better than everyone thinks. And for Matt Ryan, like, he's sniffed it. He's been that close. This is his opportunity. And I think we are going to see a very, very motivated Matt Ryan. I think we're going to see a very, very motivated Colts team. I mean, they had the most embarrassing finish of last year. To lose the Raiders and then obviously losing to the Jags week 18, like, that was the worst ending of a season last year. At least the Cardinals, who also had an embarrassing ending, happen in the playoffs. Like, we've seen teams have embarrassing losses in the playoffs. It's still in the playoffs, right? The Colts did not make it to the playoffs. How that's possible, I still don't know, but it happened. Now you get Matt Ryan. Now you get the team and definitely the head coach who has a lot to prove. I'm bullish on them this year. And then last but not least, I saw, some teams, obviously the Ravens and the Broncos, and there are other teams throughout the league. Some teams canceled it. I saw Doug Peterson canceled practices. But the Broncos are having their mandatory minicamp this week. And I saw Nate Hackett, who's, UC Davis guy. He's excited. He brings a lot of great energy. Was just talking about just being interviewed. I mean, they're practicing now on the field. And I don't know that much about the one of the Walton kids who purchased this team beside, it's weird, right? They're one of the biggest businesses in the country, but it doesn't feel they're out front in the sense of like Elon or Bezos or even some of the tech guys like Tim Cook or, there are bigger Jamie Dimon, just CEOs that we feel we know their personality, or if you watch finance shows, they're just a bigger part of it. I never see the Waltons talk. I don't know anything about them. Even David Tepper, when he bought it, like a lot of people knew a lot about him. Cohen, who bought the Mets. Ballmer, who bought the Clippers. Like those guys, it felt like we had somewhat of an idea what they were going to be like as owners. I know nothing about the Waltons, beside that they own Walmarts and are super rich. All of them. But here's what I do know. When super rich people purchase something, like they typically want to hire the guys to run their operation. That's the whole point of owning something, right? Is you get to dictate who runs something and who doesn't. Now, sometimes if you bought a random business and someone told you, you know what, the guy running your business is the most talented person in the industry, you would be crazy not to keep him. If we just bought a random football team and Sean Payton was my head coach, and everyone that I talked to in the business was like, you know what, you're very, very lucky. You just got one of the best coaches. You'd keep him. You wouldn't even think twice. He'd have a much longer leash. But when you inherit a team, you inherit a coach. You don't inherit a team. He bought the team. And you get this coach that, let's face it, a couple years ago, most people had not heard of. Like, Russell Wilson is going nowhere. Many people expect Russell Wilson to sign a massive, massive contract extension this offseason. But Hackett, like, what is his equity, one, with the Broncos, two, with the Waltons, and just three, overall with the league? Like, when I say with the league, like, is the media going to defend him? He doesn't have any. So when you look at this guy, I think the pressure on him, and I've said it for a while, the pressure on Josh McDaniels is high. Mark Davis is not firing him. I said Brandon Staley, pressure is enormous. He has the best roster. Dean Spanos is so cheap. His sister's suing him now. He ain't firing him either. But Nate Hackett, who just got a brand new owner in the middle of minicamp, who paid almost $5 billion, the biggest purchase in the history of American pro sports team, I think is now officially on the clock. And I'm not saying that's fair. I'm not saying that's right. But that's just the way the world works. This guy just bought the business. I had several friends who are either part of a company that were bought by venture capitalist firms, or I had a family friend that started their own company and were purchased by a venture capitalist firm. And basically what they do is they pick specific industries, whether it's alarms, whether it's cold boxes and Safeways and Albertsons, and they basically buy a huge cluster of them, maybe like 6, 7 in a given region. And then they consolidate them all to make a lot of money. And then they take those consolidated companies, basically put them under one umbrella, and then they sell it again. It's basically just selling cash flow. And a lot of times when the businesses are doing well, they let the people that are running the individual companies keep running them. But sometimes they say, hey, listen, we'll give you a year or 2 years of leeway, and they never do. And they either fire those people, force them out. They basically place their own person in there. That's the way the world works. I don't think it's going to be any different. Who's to say that Walton, in the back of his mind, doesn't think, I'll pay Sean Payton $20 million a year. He just literally paid $5 billion for the team. Think about Steve Ballmer. Basketball is a little different. It's much more player dependent, a little less about the coach. He got the team, and all he thought about was like, how do I get Kawhi Leonard? How do we get more stars? How do we get stars? And what did he do? He figured out a way to get stars. who's to say that Walton won't just be like, I'll do whatever it takes to get Sean Payton. I'll pay Sean Payton $22 million a year. Get him out of retirement, get him away from the Fox booth, and have him coach the Denver Broncos. And look at what he can tell him. I have a quarterback under contract and a good roster for you. So, again, not anti this guy. I don't even know that much about him, besides where he went to college a long time ago. And then his dad once coached for Bill Walsh and he coached Joe Montana. But I think the moment this sale is official, I guess it's quote-unquote unofficial right now. He's getting the team, but whenever the money is transferred and he's announced as the new owner of the Denver Broncos, I think Hackett's immediately on the clock. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description, and make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.